بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah we're going to be learning about the sciences of the Quran. Only an introduction. So sciences it just means ulum al-Quran, the knowledge of the Quran. So to understand the Quran, to do tafsir of the Quran, you need to know you need to have some tools basically. And it's actually called like the fundamentals of tafsir. But also, you need to have some understanding of this, which is essential for your belief and your knowledge about the Quran. So you can kind of defend yourselves from any misconceptions, or also to know who to learn tafsir from, where to learn, take your knowledge from, and also even to understand the Quran. We did learn some things relating to the Quran, like how the Quran was compiled and all of that. But inshallah, today we're going to learn something which is very important, like how the Quran is a miracle and all of that, inshallah. So the Quran, it can be defined as the miraculous word of Allah, which He sent down upon the Prophet, the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through angel Jibreel. In its precise meaning and precise wording is transmitted to us by numerous persons who say it's called tawatur in hadith, both verbally and in writing. In Arabic, they say Al-Quran huwa kalamullah al-mu'jiz. The Quran is the words of Allah. It's a miracle. Okay. Al-Munazzal ala al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is revealed upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Al-Mahfuz fi sudur, Al-Maktub fi suhuf. It's memorized in the hearts. That means it's memorized, preserved through its wording, and it's written in the scrolls. So it's written down. وصل إلينا بالتواتر المنقول إلينا بالتواتر. It reached us through many people memorizing the Quran and teaching the next generation like that, how it reached us without no doubt. Okay? So that's the Quran. So one word we're going to look at is, or we could look at why we're saying it's the words of Allah, and also we can say it's not created. Some people, we're going to see like maybe in other lessons how some people started to use logic to understand certain things like Allah's attributes and all of that. And there was a big argument, debate about, is the Quran created or is it not created? So it goes back to, if the Quran is Allah's words and Allah's words are part of Allah, so you can't say it's created. But the paper that the Quran is written on, that's created. But the words are Allah's words. If Allah's not created, then obviously His words are not created. But we're not going to go into that. We're just going to look at the word, how the Quran is a miracle. So the Quran is a miracle, and it's proved, even the Quran proves that it's a miracle, because first of all, it challenged the Arabs to come with something like the Quran. And because they were saying, إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُهُ بَشَرٌ. They said, he's being taught by some man, some scholar. And then Allah said, لِسَانُ الَّذِي يُلْحِدُونَ إِلَيْهِ أَعْجَمِيٌّ وَهَذَا لِسَانُ عَرَبِيٌّ مُبِينٌ. They're talking about some non-Arab, and the Quran is very eloquent words, in Arabic. How is that possible? And then they said, oh, Muhammad, wrote this with his hand. But then Allah says that he was an ummi, an nabi al-ummi. He was illiterate, he couldn't write. So Allah said, okay, if you think Muhammad wrote the Quran, then come with something like the Quran. Allah said, فإن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. Allah said, if all of mankind and jinn get together to produce something like the Quran, they could not do it, even if they were to help each other. Okay? Which means that sorry. Which means they couldn't come with something like the Quran. So 1 second. They were defeated in that purpose, they couldn't come with something like the Quran. That just proves that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't write it, and it's Allah's words. Then again, Allah made the challenge even easier. He said, okay, try to produce 10 surahs like the Quran. Just 10. عشر سور مفتريات. So just 10 ayats like it. And whoever you want, let them help you. In kuntum sadiqin, if you're truthful. They couldn't do that as well. They couldn't come with 10. Like 10 surahs like those in Juz Amma. They couldn't do that. Okay, that's how the Quran stands as a miracle. Its wording and its eloquence. Again, the Quran predicts the future. Okay? You probably know that. But it predicted the military. One example, it predicted that the Romans would be victorious. The Byzantines would be victorious over the Persians, the Sasanians. So it was Syria. I think they were fighting over Syria. The Romans, Allah says, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون في بضع سنين. Allah said, Rome was defeated in the nearest land, in the lowest land. And after their defeat, they will also conquer again within a few years. So it was, I think, 620. About that time, they reconquered and took over the land from Persians. So that was a prediction, and the Arabs saw this. And there's many other predictions. There's many other predictions that the Quran mentions. And also the Quran has descriptions of natural phenomena, like the expansion of the earth, of the universe. Allah says, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. You created the heavens. The heavens are created by might, and verily I'm expanding it. So the universe is expanding. They discovered that, with telescopes and technology, with the Hubble telescope. But they discovered that it's expanding. They didn't know that before, but the Quran already mentions that. Also, the water cycle. The Quran talks about the water cycle. Surah Nur and other surahs. Allah says, وَيُنْشِئُ السَّحَابَ الثِّقَالِ. Allah makes, the clouds heavy. And so that process of rain, the rain cycle is mentioned, the water cycle is mentioned in the Quran. Even the embryology, how the embryo grows in the womb, that you can only see with a microscope, or you can't see all of this and it's hard for people to know at that time. But Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam read this to them, and it was in the Quran. Also, there's no contradictions in the Quran. So the Quran challenges people and says, if you find contradictions in the Quran, then you can claim it's not from Allah. So Allah said, they not consider the Quran, like ponder over it. If it had been from other than Allah, they would have found many contradictions in it. Like you have the Bible, or the Injil that was changed. There's different authors, but there's different authors. They have different thinking. They mix the dates. And that's why you find one date says here this happened. This not the same date says this happened. Another day says this happened. It's like contradicting the date. The days contradict. The characters contradict. So none of that exists in the Quran, which existed in the other books, or that was caused by humans changing the Quran, the books. Okay, we learned about the collection of the Quran. We learned how the Quran. So we covered this in the Khulafa al-Rashidin Sirah. So I'm just going to go over this briefly. First of all, how was the Quran at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How was it recorded? It was recorded every time Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the verses. He used to tell the companions. He used to write the Quran, like Muawiyah and Ali. He used to tell them to write it down, other companions, and they would write on wherever they found. At the time of Abu Bakr, remember we talked about the Ridda wars, apostasy, those apostated, and they got into battles with Muslims who didn't want to pay zakah. Some of them left Islam. And when these battles took place, many people who memorized the Quran from the companions died. So Umar suggested that Abu Bakr should collect the writings of the Quran before the Quran is lost. And he chose Zayd ibn Thabit. He chose Zayd to do that. And obviously there was witnesses, and all the material was collected, was kept in the house of Hafsa. At the time of Uthman, there was another confusion. And it could have led to the confusion in the Quran, because people were reading with different dialects. The Quran was revealed on with seven dialects, okay, according to how the Arabs spoke at that time. And Muhammad said, Jibreel recited the Quran to me in one form, and after that I had revised it, and I asked him to recite some more, which he did until it was seven forms, and it goes up to 10. So I'll show you at the end some of those the 10 that have been preserved. Obviously, the 10 which are authentic that have been preserved, and their names, and even till today, there's people who specialize in them. Okay, so at the time of Uthman, he gets rid of all the other dialects, and he says, let's focus on the Quraysh dialect, and he sends out a standardized one. All the others are burnt. Obviously, they're still preserved in memorization to avoid confusion, because there's people who, Persians accepting Islam, non-Arabs accepting Islam, and they're going to get confused with all these different dialects. So anyway, Allah promised that He will preserve the Quran. So it's preserved in memorization and in writing. Allah says, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun." Okay, with that done, we're looking at now the orders of the Quran, the chapters. Are you still with me?
Yes, Ma'alin.
Okay. I need to change that. So we know, like, the Quran wasn't revealed in one go. Okay, that's why the Arabs used to say, if only the Quran was revealed in one go. Allah says, "لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ." We're helping you kind of digest and take in the Quran. So the Quran was revealed. So if the Quran was organized according to how it was revealed, why is Surah Al-Alaq, which is Iqra, or the first verse, why is it not the first of the Quran? And the last would be an ayah in Surah Nisa, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, an ayah which talks about that the Quran, the religion was completed. Al-Yawm Akmaltu. These are the last verses. Why are they not at the end? The reason why the Quran was revealed in gradation, or according to the laws, the legislation that were needed to deal with problems as they arose. And that's why most of the Quran has reasons behind it, like the stories are telling you in Surah Al-Kahf. Jews and Christians would say, let's test Muhammad, ask him these stories, and then Allah will reveal the Quran. Muhammad will have a problem with, and his companions, with making wudu. The ayats about dry ablution were revealed like that. So the Quran we're going to see how it's organized. Obviously, it's organized by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam through revelation, and he used to say, put this ayah there, put this surah there, and we know it's done by him completely, because remember, he used to say, if you read the first 10 ayahs of Surah Al-Kahf, you'll be protected from Dajjal. The Quran is divided into Meccan and Medina surahs, or Meccan and Medina verses. But mainly, if you look at the Quran, you'll find some verses were revealed in Makkah, some surahs were revealed in Makkah, and it was said at top Makki. Some were revealed in Medina or Madani, and there's a difference between them. The Meccan, we're going to look at the Meccan ayats. Normally, like Juz Amma, if you look at Juz Amma, you can see they're all Meccan. They're revealed in Makkah. And we're going to look at some of the characteristics. So the Meccan surahs, they focus on Tawheed, like the oneness of Allah. They talk about, sorry, it's coming. Yeah, they talk about Salah, or they talk about Iman, and Allah's existence, and they because that's what people need in that society as well at the beginning. Talk about Salah, and because remember Salah was legislated when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Mecca, and that helps obviously to establish Tawheed. It talks about the unseen Jannah and Nar. So you find a lot of the surahs in Tabbat and the last juz and the juz after Tabarak and Qad Sami'. He talks a lot about this. And they're short surahs as well. That's why people start memorizing from the bottom, because it's short. And the reason why is because they were very powerful verses to get the message across to people who don't want to listen. And it was basically, that's the style of the Meccan surahs. They're very short. Verse was short, surahs were short. Also, there's challenges. We talked about the challenges. We talked about the people of the old, like people like Ad and Thamud. You find that a lot in Juz Amma and Tabarak, like Wasamaidat al-Buruj, and many other surahs. You find these stories of the people who were destroyed before. Okay. Also, if you look at the Medinan, obviously, so that was the time when the Meccan ones were a time when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Mecca, but the Medina is when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Medina, and he was basically living in a society. It was the formation of a new society. Okay, so the features of the Medina revelation is that there was a lot of laws, so Zakah, Saum, Hajj was all revealed. The laws were revealed in Medina. People of the book, the Jews and Christians were mentioned. They were not in Mecca. They were all in Medina, waiting for the new prophet. That's where they settled. There was talks about the hypocrites, like Surah Al-Ma'un talks about hypocrites. Although it's a short surah, but it's Medina because it talks about hypocrites. There was no hypocrites in Mecca. Everybody in Mecca were true, sincere believers. But in Medina, that's when people started just to believe, to go to cause problems. There was mention of jihad in the Medinan surahs because there's no fighting in the Meccan one when they were in Mecca, because they were just weak themselves. There's long verses like the Ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is like a whole page talking about loans. You don't find that in the Meccan surahs. Okay. Moving on, why would you need to know this? First of all, you would need to know this if you're someone who's learning fiqh or Islamic law, because then you would know like the rulings as well. How, for example, that the Quran, the ruling of the Quran, the beginning it was made like also that it was made haram through in stages. First, it was just they were told, that alcohol has some benefits, but its disadvantages are more. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. So the person should know what these verses are talking about. And then again, it says that the second law says that they shouldn't come to Salah when they're drunk. لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. Don't come near Salah when you're drunk. Then the last one says that it's haram. فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. That khamr, alcohol and gambling is all najis and it's haram. So that's when the alcohol was prohibited. So if somebody looked at all these different ayats, you might think, oh, so there's some benefit in alcohol, and that means we can drink it. But that was the law for the people who were already drinking it, and then slowly it was made haram. Also, for da'wah purposes, you know what to start with. So you should start with Tawheed first, and then teach the person how to pray Salah. Then you talk about other things. Seerah as well, we get to understand like the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life is reflected through the Quran. Okay, that helps knowing this was revealed in Makkah and was revealed in Medina. If we go down, some people might say, "Oh, there's a contradiction in the Quran. Here it says this one law, and here it says another law." So, for example, it would say in one place, like because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that He will replace some laws and He will replace some ayats. So there are actually some ayats which were in the Quran that Allah took away And at the beginning, it was in the Quran, it was revealed, but Allah took away. It wasn't included at the end. So Allah said, مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا. Whatever a verse I've abrogated or caused it to be forgotten, I will bring another one better than it or equal to it. So a person who's doing tafsir or who's learning law, Islamic law, he should know that this rule doesn't apply anymore. It's been changed. Okay, so he doesn't get confused. And also, a Muslim should know some of this because people might say, oh, you do have contradictions in your Quran. Look, this ayah says this, 40 days. This ayah says 100 days. This ayah, so it's good to know. I'll give you some examples of that. For example, at the beginning, fasting wasn't obligatory. Fasting Ramadan. Whoever wanted, you just had to give charity, feed poor people. And then after that, Allah said, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. Whoever witnesses the month, sees the moon, he should fast, whoever is able. So even fasting was done was in stages to make it easy for people. But the ayats are still there. Another example is when the ayah is removed. So there's an ayah which talked about how if a woman breastfeeds a baby 5 times or 10 times, that baby becomes like her son or her daughter. So the family, they can't marry, or she doesn't have to wear hijab near him when he grows up. But then it was changed to 5. First it was 10, then it was changed to 5. And these ayats were removed from the Quran, but the ruling also has been changed as well. The ruling, so we know it through the hadith. Another example is when the ayah was removed, but the law remains. The nakhs of the verse alone, not the law. For example, it says in the Quran, that used to say in the Quran at the beginning, that if a man or a woman that were married before commit adultery, they should be stoned to death if they were already married before. الشيخة والشيخة إذا زانيا فرجموهما البتة. That is actually an ayah. So Umar ibn Khattab said, one day people will come and they would say, this ayah is not in the Quran, so we shouldn't stone people who committed zina and were married before. But he said, this ayah was in the Quran, but Allah took it away. And there's wisdom behind that, but the law still applies. Another example is, anyway, that's some examples. Also, the Quran is divided into muhkam and mutashabih. Some ayats are very clear, and some ayats are obscure. They're not very clear. So Allah says, it is He who revealed the book to you, and some verses are muhkamat. They're the essence of the book, and some verses are mutashabihat. They're unclear. So people who have problems in their heart, they will follow the mutashabih. For example, there's a story in the Quran which talks about, Qawm Lut. And some people will take this story and say, oh, they weren't punished because they were homosexuals. They were punished because they were trying to rape the guests of Lot. Okay? But then we say to them, there's other verses which clearly show what they're doing was wrong, because Allah said, are you approaching men instead of women? And this is why they were destroyed, because of that. So the ayah is clear, but the story could be understood in different ways. For example, so Allah said they want to cause problems between the Muslims. A lot of atheists would use these ayahs which are unclear, and people who are hypocrites to destroy Islam. So as a Muslim, you should say, it is all from Allah, I believe in it. Okay? It is all from Allah. So Aisha radiallahu anha said, if you meet those people who look for those unclear ayats, then stay away from them. They're the ones who Allah mentioned in the Quran. For example, hijab. They might come and say, oh, there's no hijab in the Quran. Where does it say hijab? So these ayats, if they're unclear to them, there's many ayats and there's a hadith, okay, which explain what a hijab is. So this is important that you know that not every ayah is basically clear. It's there to test people, and sometimes it comes in stories, and it could be misunderstood. Okay, so that's very important for you to know. If I go down, I have a little bit left. Okay, so the person who's doing tafsir. So basically, if you want to learn tafsir, don't learn tafsir from everybody and anybody. Because first of all, they have to have the correct aqidah. Let's say if you're learning tafsir from a person who's a Shia, like we talked about, you're going to have problems. If you're learning tafsir from a person who's Khawarij, the people who make not all the Muslims kafir, you're going to have a problem. So you have to know who you're learning from. Secondly, their methodology. You're supposed to understand the Quran with the Quran. If there's no ayah to explain it, then look at the Sunnah. There's no Sunnah, look at what the companions said. Then if you can't find that, then you look at those who follow them, their opinions, and then the opinion of the scholars. The person should have correct knowledge. You should know Arabic. You should know like the different types of the way Arabic is constructed, and he should have knowledge about the seerah, general knowledge in Islam, in depth. There's some good tafsir books, probably not the first. We know Ibn Abbas was one of the best mufassirin, and then people learned from him. Ibn Abbas had students, and then that's how tafsir was recorded. But one tafsir you will find translated in English, and it's by a reliable sheikh called Ibn Kathir. He lived a long time ago. This is kind of tafsirs that you should be looking for while looking at, inshallah. Also, the word tafsir, it just means to explain. So the person who is explaining, interpreting the Quran, he has to do it according to what we've already talked about, the methodology. Allahu Alam. I think it finishes there. But here also, we were talking about the different recitations. These are the different recitations recorded by these sheikhs, and then they had students. So now there's 10. These are the 7 famous ones. Now it's called Nafi' al-Madani. And there's 2 that branch off from him, Warsh al-Qalun, and Ibn Kathir al-Makki. And so it's slight differences, variations in terms of the haraka, changing the words from singular to plural, or changing a word completely. But it would have sometimes different meanings, and that's used also by the sheikh who's doing tafsir to say that this ayah can have many meanings, which are all correct. Wallahu alam. Okay. Obviously, if you want to read more about this, I have put a link of a book by a sheikh called Bilal Phillips. He wrote a very good book. It's called Science of Tafsir or Surah Tafsir. You can read that in more detail. I'll kind of summarize that book for you.